This 2006 Honda CBR1000RR is having an issue. It will start after it's been sitting for a while, but it won't start after it's been ridden. That leads me to believe that the stator and the voltage regulator have potentially gone bad. So today we're going to walk through the process of how to replace both of those items, make sure this bike is charging the battery properly and keeping the rider safe on the road. So if you're not familiar with the electronic systems of a motorcycle, that's fine. This isn't a very hard task. But the battery is typically under the seat. The battery is charged as the engine spins what is called a stator. The stator acts as a generator. There's magnets inside that put power into a voltage regulator that then recharge the battery while running the 12-volt system. So we're going to start by taking off some of the body panels so that we can access the stator cover and the voltage regulator that's behind here. The first thing we do is we're going to disconnect the battery. So on this CBR, there's two bolts that hold the seat on. You remove these two bolts just by pulling up on the rubber like this. Not all bikes are like this. This is applicable just to the CBR. Kawasaki's, for example, you have to take off the back seat to get access to removal of the front seat. So my brother-in-law, who owns this bike, first noticed the issue after he installed a USB charger and voltmeter directly to the battery. That was giving him the issue of draining the battery, and he noticed it wasn't charging all the way while he was riding. All those things led me to believe that this is an issue with the stator. So truthfully, one of the best practices before removing the stator is to drain the oil out, because the stator is actually in oil. This person recently did an oil change, doesn't want to lose the fresh oil, so I'm going to take the stator cover off and lose as little bit of oil as possible. What I've done is kept the bike upright and not on the side stand so that the oil can settle back into the pan rather than in the cover. I will lose some oil. I'll top it off once we're done. So for this CBR, I can get the stator off without removing any body panels, but I do want to take the body panel off because the voltage regulator sits right back here. So I'm going to pull off this side panel. There's just a couple bolts that hold it on and some push pins along the front, and then also in the bottom down here. If you've never seen push pins like this before, you can take a small tool like an Allen key, push down the metal piece until it pops, and then you can use your fingernails, pull it out and drop it down into the abyss. As I mentioned before, this stator is in oil, so what I'm going to do is, before I take these bolts out and remove the case cover, which will expose all the oil, I'm going to grab one of these absorbent towels that I have. They're meant for oil ketchup and other types of spills that you might have in the garage. I'm going to just push it in between the radiator hose and the engine cover. And I've also got an oil catch pan I'm going to put underneath of it just in case. It's normally good practice to know which bolt goes where, but I know that all of these bolts are the same size. The stator is magnetically attached to the rotor that's inside of there, so there is some pressure holding this cover on. It's a good idea to use a rubber mallet and a plastic scraper. Do not stick a screwdriver in there, please. You might be tempted to put a metal screwdriver in there and do this and twist it around. That'll mar up the edges and prevent it from sealing, and then you'll have to cover it completely in gasket sealer and make a huge mess, and it's just gross and it doesn't work very well. So be careful when you take this off. Don't stick your fingers in there. You might get your finger stuck. It could hurt, so be careful, be cautious, take your time. But I like to tap it with the rubber hammer or rubber mallet first, kind of just breaking any of the sealant that's on there loose a little bit. There are little tabs around the cover. Those tabs are where you can stick your finger to pull and cause some pressure to pull out. Now, this stator has been replaced before by the previous owner based off of the gasket sealer that I'm seeing. So this might be a bit harder to get off than usual. It will take some working, but you should be able to find one corner where you can pull it away, kind of wiggle, and work your way around. You can really feel that magnet. All right. So this is what the stator looks like. You've got the rotor in here, magnets pull that in. As you see, we didn't lose a whole lot of oil, so there wasn't much reason to drain it other than just to be safe. But now that we've got this off, we can pull the wires out. So just by pulling down on the wires, I expose the sub-harness that holds that in place. Just a regular 3-pin connector. The stator's off in one piece. That 3-pin connector goes up to the regulator, so you might have to finagle your way around some of the other wires in place just to pull that through. And now we should be able to disconnect the voltage regulator as well. So there's 2 sets of wires coming off of the voltage regulator, one that goes to the stator and then one that goes to the main harness. We obviously want to disconnect both of those, and then we can remove the voltage regulator off of this panel here with just the 2 bolts that hold it in place. And I am dropping stuff all over this project, aren't I? All right, voltage regulator's off now. So there are a few ways you can check to see whether or not the stator has gone bad. The voltage regulator is a lot harder to test. In some cases on the back of it, you can see if there's a deformation to it. If it's blown out, then it's obviously needed to be replaced. But it's best to replace these anytime you change the stator anyway, just so you're safe. Now on the stator itself, you can see that all of these wires are coated in a rubber, like a bronze color. That will start to look brown and burned, and sometimes you can even smell it if they've gone bad. This one doesn't look terribly bad. What you can do is find the service manual and find the specifications for how much resistance there should be between each of these 3 plugs. That will tell you definitively whether or not this stator has gone bad. I gave my brother-in-law the option to test it and say, okay, we want to replace it, or he said, I don't care, I don't want to deal with it, let's just put a new one in and replace it anyway and be safe. So I'm just going to do that, swap this one out with the new one that I've got. I'll show you what I have right here for that. So on Amazon, you can actually buy this kit. This kit is a full replacement for the charging system. It comes with a brand new voltage regulator, already wired up to go with the CBR1000. It's got the same connections we pulled off. Same look, same backer plate, same wiring, everything. It's an OEM replacement. And then came with a brand new stator as well. So it has the same connection point, it has the same rubber that goes through the gasket. This is a direct plug and play, and most importantly, it comes with the gasket. I'll link this product below, this whole kit. Again, this is for a CBR1000. If you have a different bike, please make sure that it fits your make and model before you order anything. There are 4 bolts that hold the stator in place. There is a little wire cover here held in with 1 bolt, and then you just put the new one in the same thing. You do use Loctite on these bolts, torque them to spec. I always suggest if you're using any bolts inside your engine, you find the torque specs and you torque them correctly. On this bike, it is a size 5 Allen key for these 4 bolts. This kit did not come with new bolts, so you will need to keep these bolts. Some kits will come with replacement bolts. This one did not. It's all good, but because it was cheap. It's a size 10 bolt there, by the way. Do not reuse these gaskets, please. The gasket that you take off, please replace it. I see so many times people try to reuse gaskets just to save a buck. Don't do that. They used a ton of gasket sealer on this, though. All right. One thing to note there, though. The gasket is on the other side of the rubber. So the rubber piece goes in first, then the gasket goes over it. That way it creates a good seal. I'm going to grab a razor blade and clean off all that gasket sealer that was on there before. But with that, we can pull this out. It's always a good idea to clean this too. Use some brake cleaner, wipe it all down, get all the old oil out of there. I've never invested in a gasket scraper, but I've been doing more and more of this. I'm thinking I should try to spend the $7 to get one. My go-to's just been a razor blade for so long. As long as you keep it straight and you're not on the sharp edge facing straight down, like cutting it, you're fine. It's not really a big problem. So after I got this cleaned up, I went and found the torque specs for these bolts that hold the stator into the cover and determined that I don't actually need to use Loctite. The factory doesn't suggest using Loctite. It says that you should just apply oil to it and you're good to go. When I go to fit this up to the new stator, up to the cover, I see that this rubber grommet right here doesn't line up with this. So I will need to move this down by hand to line up with the case cover and seal properly. We need to make sure that there isn't stuff blocking the path of travel right here, because that would be potentially damaged by the rotor as it spins around. So be cautious about this. Make sure everything lines up properly before you really torque everything to place. So I'm going to put these bolts in loosely just to hold it in place, and then apply the locking bracket. With the rubber seal in the case cover, I do actually want to put a little bit of gasket sealer on that just to ensure that it seals effectively. Alright, now that we've got the gasket sealer in place, we can drop that rubber grommet in to the channel, take the pinch bracket, hold it down, and apply the bolt. Alright, now we can torque these down. I'm going to start them off with the impact. I'm not going to apply the impact, just like that. No clicking, not really applying force, just getting it through the threads. Now we can torque it to 9 foot-pounds. I've already got my torque wrench set to 9 foot-pounds. We are good to apply the gasket now. This kit specifically came with a gasket that already has a self-sealing gasket adhesive to it, so we don't need to apply any more gasket sealer to this. As we torque this down on the engine, it will spread out and create a better seal, but what I will do is put a little bit on just so it stays in place. We've got the locator pins, but sometimes that isn't enough, so I'll just put some on my finger and apply it to a couple parts of where the gasket will sit so it sticks better when I go to put the cover back on the engine. And this is very small amounts. Alright, let's go put this back on the engine. As with the cover, we want to make sure that this surface is clean, so I'm going to take my time carefully and just get some of the excess gasket sealer that was on this off. Last thing you want to do is get gasket sealer in any of your oil passages. That'll clog up your engine, cause it to overheat, and worse. When you're putting this back on, remember that magnet that you had to fight against to get it off? Now you have to fight with it to put it on. You want to make sure that you don't get your fingers stuck in it. The easiest thing you can do is look for these locator pins and see where they go in the case. That way you know which way to align it when you go to put it back on. That magnet's going to suck it in real quick. So use strong fingers. Try your best to line it up before you let go. There we go. And it should just suck right in. Now we can put these bolts back on. We want to alternate which order we tighten them so that it applies evenly. Let me go look at the torque specs on these bolts and I'll let you know. Alright, on these bolts, torque spec is 9 foot-pounds again. And remember I said they were all the same size? Just throw them back in, get the thread started a little bit. I'm going to use this just to drive them in, but not to give any torque to it. Just because, honestly, I had a guy make fun of me saying I was using a socket wrench to put all these back in. And he's like, hey, use T-handles. So, I see your T-handles and I raise you a impact driver. Haha. Do not do that to get to full torque. That is just to get them to a point where they are finger tight. This is still set to 9 pounds. You want to do an alternating crisscross pattern so that we can ensure even distribution of torque. Alright, I'm going to go around and just torque all these again, make sure it's all still set to 9 foot-pounds. Then we're good to hook up the voltage regulator and wire it all back together. With the voltage regulator, it might make sense to actually feed the wires through before you attach it to that backing plate. That way you can get it routed back there easily and cleanly and not have to worry about too much stuff getting in the way. Start with the 3 wires going to the stator and drop that down. And run that behind the backer plate. And then the 2-wire one, connect it, cover it. Now that the wires are routed up, I can actually attach this plate. One thing I'd like to note, these 3 wires, don't run it behind the plate because that creates a lot of tension on it. Just go up and over it like that and use the 2 bolts that you had taken out before to run it back into that plate. With the 3 wire, connect those 2, pull the cover down, and tuck it back. And then you're good to go. All right, so you have changed out the stator, you've changed out the voltage regulator. It should be all good to go put back together now. We're gonna put the side panels back on, put the lower back on. Don't forget to reconnect your turn signal, and then we can put the battery back together and we should be good to go. You know, just to be safe, since I just put all this stuff back on, before I put the fairings and stuff back together, I'm gonna put the battery back on its connections, start the bike, make sure it runs. Got the voltmeter, I can check the voltage, make sure it's charging the battery as it should. Dang it. All right, so the battery's hooked up, stator regulator installed. We've got power to the ignition, power to the voltmeter. It's reading 12.4 volts right now. Let's start it and watch what happens. 12.8 is pretty good. 13.7, pretty good. I'd say that's a win. All right, so I can throw the plastics back on. You don't need to watch the boring process of that, but hopefully this was helpful for you. Hopefully you're able to get the stator and regulator changed in your bike. You can get your battery charging, get back on the road and have some fun. Stay safe out there. I'll see you in the next video.